of 2016, the Western Center for Historic Preservation and the Vanishing Treasures program, both of the National Park Service, conducted an oral history training workshop at the historic Whitegrass Dude Ranch in the Grand Teton National Park. The instructors were historian Dr. Luann Jones and archivist Brenna Lissaway from the National Park Service. 17 trainees attended from several states, including Hawaii. Their backgrounds included historic architecture, anthropology, American tribal preservation, interpretive services, and museum archives. The workshop was designed to lead trainees through a series of lectures and exercises, preparing them to conduct an oral history interview with a person of significance to the history of the Whitegrass Ranch. The interview that follows with Al Williams, a Whitegrass Ranch Rehabilitation Project Manager, was conducted by trainees Amy Cassidy, Irma Valera, and David Hasty. Al was asked about his 32-year career with the National Park Service and the rehabilitation work he directed at the Whitegrass Ranch, preparing it for National Park Historic Preservation Training Center.
Tell me about your experience when you first got started working here for the National Park Service.
When I first started working for the National Park Service was on trail crew, and I had come here for a summer position. I had applied for about 4 years to get a job here because there was an awful lot of applicants for the positions at the time, and I finally got a call and I was hired. And so I was packing all of my stuff to get ready to come up here, and I got another call, and I was fired. It was a very short-lived career here with the Park Service. So I went back to work, and about a week later, I got another call saying, you need to be here by 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, signed in and actually physically working, or we can't bring you on. So I dropped everything that I was doing. I was working on a construction site, shook everybody's hand really quick, told the boss, sorry, but I have to go now. And then I came up here for a summer job on trails. And it turned out to be, basically, to me, I thought it was the most perfect position that there ever was in the world, because I got a chance to hike around in the park. I got to see all of the trails in the park, and I got to work on mostly rock, stonework, some cutting trees, and spending an awful lot of time getting familiar with a shovel and carrying a shovel around the woods. And so I did that for 10 years, and then decided to grow up and get something besides a seasonal position, and that's when I became a permanent with the maintenance division.
Now, you've spent 32 years here at Grand Teton National Park. What kept you here? What was the draw to stay at this park?
Who could leave? The Park Service is kind of designed, and it encourages people to move around. And me, I couldn't think of being anywhere else but here. This was what I loved. The places I loved, things that I'd like to do was here. The winters I loved. Hiking in the backcountry, just everything was here, and so I wanted to make my contribution to the Park Service right here. It might have limited my career. I probably could have been a lot different or a lot farther up the ladder had I decided to move around a little bit. But I just wanted to. I didn't want to leave, and I mean I didn't want to leave, so I didn't.
So you dropped everything from where? Where did you come from?
I came from Denver, so I was, disenchanted living in a large city, looking for any avenue to change, any avenue to escape that kind of lifestyle. My dad was born and raised in Ashton, which is just a small town just on the other side of the Tetons. So I remember coming through here as a small child. We would come up there and spend a week every year fishing and picking huckleberries. And so I remember driving down the inside road as a kid, looking out the window, wondering what it would be like to live here, because there was nothing here. And the town of Jackson had one stoplight in it and a couple of stop signs, and so I basically knew what where this was when I was applying for this job. So it's like, that's why it was real easy to drop everything and leave Denver.
Were you trained for some of the work that you've been doing?
After my first year on trails, I went to a log cabin building school in Minnesota, and I spent the winter working and learning how to do log cabins. And then when I came back the next year on trails, we had a convenient forest fire that burned down our entire trails operation, and which included 2 buildings. So then I spent the next couple of years building those with the training that I'd done from Minnesota.
Was that training part of your work training, or was something you did because you wanted to learn?
It was something I did because I wanted to learn. And so, unfortunately, it worked out very, very well, because, like I said, I stumbled right into a need after I'd had the skills for the next year.
How did you come to Whitegrass Ranch?
Well, I lived really close by, and so I would explore my neighborhood, and this was actually still an operating dude ranch when I first got here and first started living in the house that I've been living in for 30 years. And so I came up here at one of the events, because I figured another person wouldn't be noticed. And then shortly after that, the next year, Frank Gailey passed away, and then the Park Service took it over. And then while I was on trail crew, my boss was always looking for different jobs to get money from some other division to help pay for his trail crew. So maintenance needed to have this place boarded up, so he looked at me and gave me the keys to a truck and a bunk of plywood and a saw and generator, and I came up here that next year and spent a couple of weeks boarding it up. And so it's always been kind of a special spot. And so again, and then I live within a half a mile of here, so I mean I'd come up here on a very regular basis to kind of make sure the plywood's back on the windows and poke around, and if one of the roofs was blowing in and leaking, I kind of, without spending too much time, I'd kind of fix it up a little bit. So I've actually been basically been poking around this ranch since 1984.
Can I ask you, what was your impression on the party, the day that you show up for the party, that you just came? You crashed the party, didn't you?
Basically did, yes. That's the word I was trying to avoid, but that's basically it. The dudes used to, they used to, at this one point in time, they had a pig that they had named, and they said, well, we're having so-and-so over for dinner tonight, and apparently that was their pig roast code for doing the pig roast. And I didn't get in on that part of the party, but I just came in here. There was quite a few people milling around, and everybody had a beer in their hand, and very friendly. I didn't really realize what it was, where it was. It was just like some old ranch with a bunch of people working on it.
What was the role of the Park Service at that time on historic preservation?
Well, during the next 2 superintendents' administrations, their philosophy on cultural resources was pretty dim, I guess I could say. They wanted, Jack Stark especially wanted this to be a natural park. And so all the cultural significance didn't mean anything to him at the time. So all of the buildings that they would acquire, they would burn immediately, literally. And so they would just get rid of them. So because they just want the park to be back to being just the mountains and the trees. So basically, historic preservation was done by a match. And what saved the Whitegrass was before the fire department could get to it, it had been put on the National Register for Historic Places. So most of the buildings were protected because they were on the register.
Who put them on register?
That I cannot tell you. I have no idea who initiated that.
What was the feeling of the community about this ranch? Did they want it down, like what happened to the other ranches or the other places?
No.
What was the feeling?
The outlying, the feeling that I get when you talk to somebody about the buildings is they're usually the same question: why aren't you using them? Why aren't you fixing them up? Why aren't you saving these? So, and this is a pretty special ranch. So I think it's in the heart of everybody in the valley. So, you know, watching it fall down is kind of tough on everybody, and watching them get burned is. Most people didn't really particularly like that.
We're standing in front of the girls' cabin, which was the first building that was restored here at Whitegrass. Was there an event or a catalyst that shifted the park's attitude and inspired them to work towards preserving the ranch?
The two superintendents that basically didn't really particularly care for any kind of cultural preservation at all left. One of the last one retired, and a new superintendent came in that had a complete different mindset and on all of the cultural significance in this park, and so all of the preservation that had not happened in the last 15 or 20 years, suddenly there was a new I guess attitude and resurgence of it, and there was an awful lot better cooperation with the State Historic Preservation Office, and so. Basically, life began anew for all these old buildings, and they started looking at them with a new, with a new eye. So that's the change that I saw when a new superintendent came in. From then on, it's been on the radar of all the superintendents.
Can you tell me a little bit about the early process of beginning the program here, the rehabilitation of the ranch?
The earliest process, once decision was made to save the whitegrass. I was basically the only person that was part of the now Western Center for Historic Preservation. We didn't have a name. We didn't have a direction. We didn't have a director. Basically, didn't even have a budget. But they had me, and so I came out here and spent most of a summer putting black plastic and lath on all of the buildings here to basically. The deterioration that happened in the last 20 years was pretty significant, and so the only way to save them in the condition that it would keep them from further deteriorating was to work on the roofs. So that's basically all I could do at the time, single-handed.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your involvement in this project? It's been going on for about 10 years now.
We kind of started looking at the buildings to see which ones we were going to start working on first, and this one here seemed to be the perfect candidate for it. So trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. You start small. So we started with this smallest building here. It had a large addition nailed onto it in the 50s, I believe it was. So we decided to pick an era, take the addition off, and work on this building. It was one that didn't need an awful lot of work at the time, so we jacked it up, put it on two I-beams, suspended it in the air, and dug down, put a new foundation, put a real foundation underneath it with footings and rebar and pins, and then put this cabin back down and rehabbed it. This was our first one. We started this one in 2006, I believe.
Is this the original location of the cabin?
Every cabin here is exactly where they started and were built, except for one. So,
which one?
The farthest one up there, 1160. Our philosophy is they look the exact location, exact aspect. The only thing that's changed on these buildings is their elevation out of the ground a little bit, just because the ground has moved in. It starts to engulf the house. Next thing you know, most of these buildings had 2 or 3 log courses in the dirt, and they're rotting. So when we put them on foundations, their aspect is the same, their exact location is the same, but they've been raised up slightly. Unfortunately, with 1160, there's a large aspen tree that was really close to the foundation, and I wanted to take it out just because aspen trees are you know, they come and go, and most of them weren't here when this ranch was built. So, and that I'm pretty sure that aspen tree wasn't there when that cabin was built either. So it really wasn't significant until we started looking at it. And throughout the years, a whole bunch of guests have stayed in that cabin had been carving their initials in the tree. So if you look at it really closely, the scars have healed mostly, but there's an awful lot of there's evidence of I guess it's called the historic graffiti on the tree. So we decided that needed to be saved, even though the tree isn't a permanent part of or it doesn't have the permanence that the cabin does. Eventually the tree's going to fall down and the cabin's still going to stay. So we sort of moved the cabin over about 1.5 feet. So it's mostly exactly where it was. But other than that, all the other buildings are exactly where they were.
We understand that there were other buildings before. So what time period are you basing yourself to save this ranch? Because you had to decide on time period, correct?
Yeah, correct. We decided we decided the time period of Frank Gailey's first wife, and so we looked at 1950, and so basically from 1950 beyond, everything that had been done past that into the 50s and 60s, we decided to get rid of, and a good portion of those were kind of less than classy additions anyway. Like the bathroom that was on this building was just a board and batten and plywood box that just extended it out about another, half the distance again from the building. And then there was a bunch of sheds that were just on the east side of the barn, and then there was a whole bunch of wrangler quarters that were down along this tree line right over here. So those weren't included in the historic register, so they fell victim to the park came in and got rid of absolutely every single thing that they could that wasn't basically nailed down with a nomination on the register. So we lost, and there was an awful lot of buildings that were here. Some of them weren't very significant to the ranch. They were part of it, and they were part of the ranch's identity, but they didn't look like they fit in.
What is your perception of the reason why they didn't want to keep any extra building? Only the ones that were on the register.
This represented something that the park might have to take care of at the time, and we did not want to deal with any other buildings other than what was being used or could be used. So all these old buildings just represented an old building to the administration that was here. The barn got sold for $1, unfortunately, and that it got removed. So I mean, the barn. Well, the barn is the identity of a dude ranch, and so Whitegrass lost its I guess its identity at the point in time because of the barn is gone, and that's when the swimming pool, the lake or the pond, and all the irrigation ditches got obliterated as well, because the park just said, well, we'll do our philosophy of turning it back to nature as much as we can.
Can you tell us a little bit about the crew that's worked here? Who has been involved in the physical restoration of the buildings?
We've hired seasonal and term work staff since 2006, and some of them keep coming back. Some of them are really good. Some of them move on. Right now, the crew that we've got now is a very dynamic, hard-working crew where they're getting an awful lot of things done. All in all, we've had really good work staff that's been working here.
For how long was the ranch without being used and just kept empty?
86 to about 2006, so close to 20 years it sat with virtually nothing. It was just dying. It was just running down.
Why was it important for you to preserve it?
It was tough to see. Well, at first it was it was hard to see it die. And it was hard to see it have the piece of plywood ripped off the door and somebody go in and trash the cabin, even though they were filthy inside. But it's like, building a fire on the floor and leaving your beer cans and stuff like that. And it's just kind of a slap in the face. And so it was just sad to see it be treated like that.
Did you have a dream or a vision for this ranch while you were doing that?
No, I did not. I had no idea that I would be here right now doing this when I was doing that. It's just something that I just felt kind of compelled to do.
Are you happy that whatever little that you did help you preserve it?
Honestly, it really did not make a lot of difference once we got to a place for what little I did, but it made a lot of difference here. So.
Why?
I'm proud of what I did.
It's a beautiful day here in the middle of July, but the winters are pretty harsh. How does that affect maintaining a building like the one that we're standing next to, the girls' cabin? Does that present more difficulties?
The winters are particularly hard on the roof edges of these buildings. They sat for 20 years without being shoveled, and eventually the roof edges started to curl down and get broke because when the snow settles, it just takes it with it. I've added a little bit of plywood to the roof decking. Basically doubles the strength of the eaves, because that's all that's there on the eaves. Maintaining them in the winter, every one of these buildings has been designed and plumbed to be able to be drained.
Right.
So basically, the winter maintenance on this will be draining the water out of them, turning the heat down to about 45 degrees, locking the door, and coming back in May. So it's they're very maintenance friendly as far as operating them in the wintertime.
So then when were you assigned to this place?
I was detailed into the WCHP in 2005. And then the WCHP started getting a little more traction, and they actually hired a director. And so after that, then we had a budget, a director, a direction, and then from there on we started picking our battles, this one being the first one, and then we started hiring a staff. And so once we started getting more than just me, then we were able to focus on getting the buildings, starting to work on some of the buildings out here. We hired a guy named Will Galloway who was a wonderful hand, and he came back for about 4 years, and so he was my steady. He was one of my steady workers. Had a really good skill set, so that was the beginnings of my first, basically, long-term permanent staff that you didn't have to retrain every year.
You have a groundskeeper. Tell us about that.
We have a volunteer caretaker here who has taken it upon himself to basically do everything that I've done plus, and we brought him along to try to figure out how we're going to make this work. And if we hadn't had Roger with us, we wouldn't be here, or we wouldn't be in the position we're in now, and we wouldn't be as far along as we are now, because he's done an absolutely beyond wonderful job.
You're standing in front of the main cabin at the Whitegrass Ranch. You were quoted to say, "I could teach everything I know about history building preservation, rehabilitation, by using the main cabin at the Whitegrass in my classroom." Why did you say that?
It had every aspect of preservation techniques that we need to use to take a building, and in pretty much any condition that it's in, and take it to where you need it to be. Whatever the decision was, whether it's to preserve it as a ruin, whether it's to rehab it for some sort of a use, or whether it was just for aesthetics, just to stabilize it. Everything was here. There was sections of the cabin that were pristine, There were sections of the cabin that were so far gone and rotten that they were non-existent. And so basically, and you know, parts of the cabin, everything needed to have a foundation. The roof was there was two different types of roofing, and the roofing was in you know, as many different types of decay as you could. So this was the perfect classroom.
It is our understanding that the kitchen is quite different. What can you tell us about that?
The kitchen, the configuration of the kitchen is the same. That one was the part where the logs had been there was a carpenter ant infestation, and they had been sitting in wet dirt for so long that the whole west side and part of the north side were completely deteriorated and almost missing. The original configuration of the kitchen, it had a big vent portico type structure on the roof, and then again the post 50 era, there was a little cellar and an addition that was built on the south side. So we took those parts out.
Some of the furniture that is still there, is that original or not?
There's very little original furniture surviving here. When Frank Gailey passed away, he had already sold the ranch to the park, and it was on a lifetime lease. And so once that happens, the family came and took what they wanted, and then the rest of it was auctioned off. So it was a public auction. So people came from all over the place, bought the horses, bought the saddles, tack, and pretty much most of the furniture that was in the buildings disappeared. And we've got pictures of them. So we're trying to replicate some of the looks in there. But over the course of the years, the Whitegrass wranglers and guests keep coming back to the buildings, keep coming back to the ranch, and they see all the progress that's being made to restore it to what it was that they remember. And quite a few people have actually donated some of the furniture back to the ranch.
We're standing in front of the main cabin. Has the facade of the cabin changed? Have there been any additions that have been taken away or anything that's changed?
Yes, it has changed significantly from what it looked like in the 80s. The porch had a huge addition on the front of the porch, great big massive porch that wrapped all the way around to the south side. On the south side right over here, there was a large sliding glass door on the one side that went into the onto the porch. There was rails around the porch, and then on this side there was the building was extended out with a series of French doors on the front, and then the porch extended beyond that. So when we decided to take it back to the area that we did, we ended up removing the French doors, rebuilding the wall that was cut out to enlarge the front room, and get rid of the French doors and get rid of all the porches and take it back to where it was pre-50s.
I'm going to ask you about historic preservation. How much did you know about that before you started working on the ranch?
Actually, I had a fairly good working relationship with a remarkable person named Harrison Goodall, who started working with me about 20 years before, when I was just getting into the maintenance division, and I was the one that was ridiculing them on their techniques, because, you know, I came from a log building background that you just replace it instead of saving it. There's a reason why we save as much of original buildings, the original fabric in any of the buildings. There is a reason for that. Buildings have a soul. Buildings are alive. So if you don't save them, they just die and go away. You know, there's a reason for saving something, to preserve it till somebody else can come by and appreciate why it's there.
Was it difficult to understand the parameters and the laws regarding historic preservation?
Not really. No. They're there for a really good reason, and they're there to keep things from getting, I guess, out of control and out of hand. So no, it's real simple to work within what we have to work with. It's, I mean, once you buy into the philosophy, then you just live it every day anyway. The decision was made not in this park to save one of the 3 remaining dude ranches in this park to turn it into a training center. We started looking at the 3 remaining dude ranches to see which ones made more sense to save. And fortunately, this one here it's close proximity, it's ease to get to, and the conditions of the buildings made this one the logical choice. And so then it was a Park Service effort to do all the compliance that needed to be done. And then we, at the time, we had a better relationship with our SHPO office, so they were highly involved, and then we had a foundation that was highly involved in this. So we've had annual visits, we had to do annual reports. They come up and do get-togethers, and they come to most of the functions. So no, it's been out in the open from the very beginning. They come and they see what's going on and see how our progress is. We did come up with a date. We set a date to complete the place about 10 years ago, and that is this August. So we might be, it'll be close, but we'll be pretty close to being finished with it by then. That's our goal.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about the cultural landscape here. I'm thinking in terms maybe of circulation, vegetation, fences, that sort of thing, water features. And I'm wondering what it was like when you got here back in the 80s, what the landscape here looked like to you.
Well, the pool still existed, which is just right over there. It was called the swimming pond, still existed, and pretty much most of the gravity irrigation system here was still there. There were still head gates in place. There were still the ditches. There was remnants of fencing that was along the roads that's right behind me. There was still a fence there. There was still buck rail fence along the original road that came in through here. So the one thing that I don't remember is the archway at the cattle guard as we first come in off of the Death Canyon Road. All of the buildings were still here. There was a big drag that was on the north end of the housing that they would use to drag this field out here to level it out every year.
What would that be, like a drag?
Imagine a large square frame made out of kind of like railroad ties, but longer. Big, massive timbers with a chain link fence and hooks down below that you could drag behind a tractor, and it would basically scarify and flatten the ground. Most ranchers use them to flatten out pasture. Back in about 86, after the ranch was auctioned, or after everything was auctioned off, one of the chief rangers at the time, his pet project was to get rid of all of the land features here on the property. So that's when another person that I know came up here with a little D5 Caterpillar and spent about a month putting everything back. And that's when we lost pretty much all the head gates, all the irrigation ditches, the pool, the swimming pond, and all the other features that were here. The only thing that survived this was the beer ditches. There was a few represented beer ditches in between some of the cabins on the north end of the property. Some of the guests complained back in the 40s that there was no way of keeping their beer cold, so Frank had some ditches dug so there was a little bit of water running by each one of the cabins, so all the guests could keep their beers in it. And so that's a kind of a unique historic feature here. So we're trying to keep those alive. But as far as the landscape goes, it's pretty. It's not very much of it survived.
Was the cemetery here?
Yes. Yeah, that's
the same that it looks right now.
Yes.
As it looks right now.
Yes. The only thing that we've done to the cemetery is there was chains that ran in between each one of the pylons, and the way snow settles, it attaches itself to the chain. It settles and it starts to pull those down, and it's broken a couple of the pylons. So we've taken the chain out from around there just to save the cemetery's, you know, it's very prominent with just the pylons there. I don't think we don't need to have a chain on there, because I mean it's not keeping anything out. A deer, a moose, or an elk will stand in there the same with a chain or without a chain. So it's just to keep from breaking any more of the pylons. There's a few plants on the ranch that are historic, but those have stayed, and so we saved everything that was here that we could.
What kind of plants would have been saved?
All of the hops that are in front of all the buildings are historic, and so when we've done any of the foundations on the building that had hops, I would save the hop roots, put them in a bucket, set them off to the side, water them, and then once we got the foundation done, we would put the roots back into the ground in their current location, or in the location that they were at. And then, you know, hops are very hardy. They survive really well. The fir tree that's right behind me, on the north side of the kitchen, that is historic. So we've saved that one. Unfortunately, it was a little too close to the building, but being historic, we decided to give it a break and keep it. And then honeysuckle that's on the south side of the Hammond porch, that's historic as well. And so that one we took great care to not disturb it very much. So it's been cut back several times, but it's something that we needed to save.
How you know they're historic?
We have pictures of all of the plants that were actually planted here. They're not native, and so they were introduced by the occupants. So that makes them historic. Got a picture of the kitchen without the fir tree in it, believe it or not. So it was actually planted there. So
in some of those pictures, did you ever notice that there may have been other, like, flowers or vegetables or anything like that?
There's an enormous amount of daffodils around here that we haven't gone overboard to salvage those. Don't have any recollection of gardens. If there was, they've come and gone, and they weren't really in any of the plans, and they weren't in any of the pictures.
You know, the field we're in, it sounds like it might have been more cultivated.
Yeah, this field here was a natural meadow. Don't know. I mean, there was still sagebrush in it. So what happened was that pretty much like this field and all the other fields that are associated with the homesteads that came here in the early 1900s, they would burn off the sagebrush and then plant smooth brome, which is a fodder grass that basically outcompetes all of the natural grasses. And so that's basically what this field is right here, is a smooth brome field.
And a little earlier you were talking about fences, and there was one type of fence that you mentioned. I wonder if you could explain what that looked like.
A buck and rail fence is the standard fence. That's pretty much, it's the prevalent fence that almost all of the homesteaders built around here. It consists of crossbucks that are, you know, nailed together, and then rails nailed along the crossbuck, and so it creates panels. And it's real easy because all your fencing material is right behind you in the woods. So you could just go in there and cut small poles, drag them out, or put them in a wagon and bring them out here. And for the cost of a bucket of nails, you can put up a large fence around the perimeter. And every time one of them breaks, you just go back into the woods and you cut another rail. And so, I mean, it's the cheap and easy way of building a fence.
Were there many places where that fence existed?
The fence that I remember was along the back road to the Sky Ranch, along the main road here, and then the fence that was behind me was actually a post and wire fence that was put in front of the main lodge. But all the other fences around here was buck and rail. And speculation, I would assume that the original fence line was probably buck and rail until they started getting wire imported to the area, or get enough money to actually buy wire.
You mentioned the main road. Is that the road that we now drive up on, or is there a different?
The road that we now drive up on was the service road. The main road is there's a row of trees that just goes right down the south side of this meadow here, and that was actually the main road that came in here. So and which is funny because you go along the Sky Ranch Road a little ways, and then you turn off into this one, and the road that had the archway on it was still the service road. So I mean, I always call that's the only road that I've ever actually used to come up and down to the ranch.
In your opinion, why this place was chosen as a site for a ranch or a dude ranch?
My opinion, well, I know that the two gentlemen that originally settled this was Harold Hammond and Tucker Bispam, and they'd actually worked in the area for a while, and I'm assuming that they picked this area here because of this natural meadow. They thought of aesthetics the same as we do, I can only imagine. So it's like you look around, and because there's this perfect natural meadow here, and then you start looking around, it's like, yeah, I know why you picked it here. I just can't blame you at all. And I certainly know why they put their houses where they did, because the view from the front porches is like, that's where I would choose too.
Well, I think I'd like to finish up asking you a final question. You were here when the National Park Service acquired the ranch, and you've seen the changes, you've been a big part of those changes, and the project's about to be finished, you're about to retire. Can you tell us a little bit about what it means to have been part of this project, to be such a big a big proponent of fixing this place and being here to see it rehabilitated?
I've had the perfect career, and I'm ending on the perfect note. Can't get better, I don't think. It's like, I'm a little proud of it. So yeah, it's been, I never thought that this would happen. I mean, I never thought that I'd end this way. I never thought that I'd be feeling this way when I left something. This is a big part of me. So yeah, immensely proud.
And based on what you said about buildings and spirits, I'm sure you left your spirit here too.
I hope so too.
And tell me where the pool was?
Okay, so the pool is right there where you see the